Good evening to the community at Cranleigh, Abu Dhabi. It's lovely to be with you this evening, and thank you for joining us for our second talker of the season for Open Minds. I feel very privileged and humble to have our speaker this evening, and I've actually spent quite a lot of time over the last 2 weeks getting to know this speaker. So for me, I'm really excited also to hear him speak to our community. I do hope you're all safe and well. We are humbled to welcome Jordan Hattar, our Open Mind speaker this evening. Jordan is a 28-year-old from California who began his humanitarian efforts in South Sudan the week after graduating high school in 2010. In South Sudan, Jordan facilitated the building of a medical clinic. In 2011, Jordan began university in South Carolina, where his Arabic professor introduced him to the refugee crisis. Jordan founded helpforrefugees.org in 2012. From 2012 to 2014, since then, Jordan's earned a BA in International Studies and a master's degree in International Relations and Politics from the University of Cambridge. Jordan then went on to intern with the First Lady, Michelle Obama, Reach's High Initiative in the White House. Since leaving the White House, Jordan's been spending his time sharing Syrian refugee testimonials in schools around the world and working on the refugee crisis from the country of Jordan. I feel very honoured, as I've said, and privileged to welcome Jordan Hattar to the online Cranleigh community this evening. Please do populate your questions in the chat, and we'll try our best to answer as many as we can at the end. Another exciting part is Jordan Hattar will be speaking to prep and senior school pupils over the forthcoming weeks. And I'm too excited for him to share his message to the pupils of the Cranleigh community. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome Jordan, our distinguished guest.
Hi, thank you so much.
Jordan, It's lovely to have you as part of our Open Mind series as Cranleigh community. As I've said, I've got to know you over the last 2 weeks, and it's been an absolute huge honour. I can't wait to hear your story this evening. And actually, I think it's time for all of our community in the times we're in to reflect even more so than we have done in the past on your messages and on your narrative that you're about to share with us. So thank you in advance. Our principal, Mr. Wilson, will come and say his thanks on behalf of the school at the end, but I don't want to take up any time of your precious story. So I'll hand over to you, Jordan.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm very happy to be with your community, and hopefully we can make this, a discussion too after I share some stories, and we can just have a discussion on some of the things I'm about to speak about. Okay, just about to share my screen. Okay, so I think you guys can see the slides now. I wanted to call this Open Minds talk Voices of Syria, because when I asked the Syrian people what they need the most in this world, they told me for someone to share their stories. You might be wondering how I got involved in the Syrian refugee crisis. I grew up in California. I started studying Arabic in university, and the first Syrian I ever met was my Arabic teacher. This is her, Ustadha Iman Hashim. And every day she would talk about Syria. But for me, Syria was, this very distant conflict. Until one day after class, I went to her office and she was crying. And I said, Ustadha Shumalik, what's wrong? And she started to tell me the story of what happened to her own family. And 2 of her cousins were killed as they were helping their neighbor in Syria. And one of them was the same age as me. I was 19 years old at the time. And I remember thinking, I need to do something. I ended up coming here to the country of Jordan in 2012. And I wanted to work in the refugee camp and find out, what they need the most. And I went to the UN headquarters here in Jordan, and they said, that's great that you want to help Jordan, but you can't work in the refugee camp. You either have to be a journalist or to work for the UN. And at 20 years old, I couldn't get a job with the UN, and I wasn't a journalist. But I decided I couldn't give up. So I ended up creating a charity and being a freelance journalist for a blog that I was writing. And I just kept showing up. And finally, they let me into the refugee camp as a journalist. And I created the charity Help for Refugees. And when I got inside the camp, this is what I saw. There was 3 inches of water throughout the whole camp. And this refugee camp is about 10 kilometers from Syria, along the Syria-Jordan border. And this was in the context of the Arab Spring. And so the Syrian people were sharing their stories on why they left Syria. And a lot of the Syrian families were telling me about this person from their same village, this boy named Hamza that was killed, and that they never wanted to leave Syria to begin with. But they felt like they had no choice. And we can go into that more if you guys want to talk about that more later. But here in Jordan, the reality of the situation is that the Syrian students were in double shift schools. And now with online learning, a new study came out that 1 in every 3 children are not even going to school online. And I think actually I'm going to skip over that video. But I wanted to share a couple stories from inside the refugee camp. I would go around the refugee camp asking the Syrian people, what do you want to share with the world? And also, what do you need the most? And I'll never forget when I asked one mother, what do you want to share with the world? I don't have a picture of her, but she looked at me and said, to know that I could be your mom. And then she turned to her 2 daughters, 11 and 8, Lial and Sidra, and they were waving at me. And she said, to know that those could be your sisters. And then she turned to her son, who was to our left, and she said, to know that that could be your brother. You know, that there's no differences between us. And I can speak, for myself, I often push away the things in this world that, are so emotional. And she was just reminding me that it was just chance where we're born. And I think there's a lot of stereotypes about refugees. Whether it's that people think that they take people's jobs, that they want to go and, bomb the country that they go to, or that that they're a burden on society. But my experiences have been really the complete opposite. This was a family I met in the Zatari camp, and I still stay in contact with them to this day. And they would share their refugee rations with me. They would put a juice box in front of me, and I would say, no, I've had enough to eat and drink. And then they would poke the straw in the juice box, and just, here I was, somewhat of a foreigner. I would bring my dictionary to the refugee camp. I could barely speak Arabic, and they were giving me everything they had. I think what's left out in the narrative about the Syrian people is the potential of the Syrian people. This young Syrian man, he, after he got asylum in Germany, he started a kitchen, basically like a soup kitchen for homeless people in Germany. I think about these Apple devices that we have. I mean, Steve Jobs' father was from Syria. And I remember meeting people from Steve Jobs' hometown, his father's hometown in Syria, and they were showing me the footage of the bombings, the last seconds of some people's lives. And every now and then it would be on the device, it would be on an iPhone. And I remember thinking, did Steve Jobs' father ever intend to have a son that would go on to create Apple on the iPhone? And then people from his home village would be showing me the last seconds of people's lives on the device that his son created. And as I learned more and more stories, I became close with a few different organizations in and around Syria. One of them is the Syrian American Medical Society. And their former president, Dr. Zahar Salul, shared this picture with me of the aftermath of a bombing of one of their medical facilities in Syria. And, he would often share with me, this wasn't uncommon. They've actually had 40% of their facilities bombed across Syria as they're carrying out medical operations. But he told me the story of two 17-year-old girls that were killed in this bombing. And one of the girls' names was Amina. And he told me this 17-year-old girl was a student nurse. She could have left Syria to go to Lebanon or Jordan or Turkey, but instead she stayed in Syria to try to help. And, I just remember crying and thinking, no matter what I do, we'll never be able to get her back. And I turned to my mentor who came and spoke at my high school. His name is Carl Wilkins. He was the only American that stayed in Rwanda during the 1994 genocide. And Carl's advice was, we have to remember what Amina did and remember the courage that she had. He said, the courage that she had to stay in Syria and try to help, he said that will always be more powerful of a message than those that bombed this hospital. He went on to say, we have to love the beauty more than we hate the evil. We have to love the beauty more than we hate the evil. And I think it also makes me think we have to decide what we're going to talk about, what we're going to share. In a world of, seemingly unending conspiracy theories and just really awful things in the news, I think it's really important to share inspirational stories and stories that give us hope as well. And after learning Amina's story, I learned Alex's story. And this is a 6-year-old boy from Scarsdale, New York. He's now 10 years old, but at 6 years old, he saw the pictures that went around the world that came out of Syria. I won't share the picture because it's just really graphic, but there was a 4-year-old boy in the back of an ambulance. He had blood covered all over his face. This 6-year-old boy saw the picture of the 4-year-old boy in Syria, and here's how he decided to respond.
Dear President Obama, remember the boy who was picked up by the ambulance in Syria? Can you please go get him and bring him to our home? Park in the driveway or on the street, and we'll be waiting for you guys with flags, flowers, and balloons. We will give him a family, and he will be our brother. Catherine, my little sister, will be collecting butterflies and fireflies for him. In my school, I have a friend from Syria, Omar, and I will introduce him to Omar, and we can all play together. We can invite him to birthday parties, and he will teach us another language. Since he won't bring toys and doesn't have toys, Catherine will share her big blue strawberry white bunny, and I will share my bike, and I will teach him how to ride it. I will teach him
addition and subtraction. Those are the words of a 6-year-old boy. He teaches us a lot. The humanity that a young child can display, who hasn't learned to be cynical or suspicious or fearful of other people because of where they're from or how they look or how they pray. We can all learn from Alex.
Alex, 6 years old.
I feel like I could watch that 100 times. And basically after watching it 100 times, I thought, I really want to meet this boy. And we've actually become really good friends. I've become really good friends with him and his family. And the picture on the left is when we were speaking together as part of Diversity Day at a boarding school in the US. And someone asked him what diversity means to him. And he said, well, everyone in my school is from different cultures and they're all my friends. And he started listing every single person in his school. And we're just sitting there and he just keeps mentioning different names. But I share Alex's story, and I say Alex's choice because Alex reminds me that we don't always control what happens to us in the world, and we don't control what happens beyond us as well. But we always control how are we going to respond. Are we going to respond with fear and close our hearts and minds to not just refugees, but anyone that we think of that doesn't agree with our ideologies or our beliefs? Are we going to close our minds to those people, or are we going to respond with empathy, like Alex? And as I learned the stories of the Syrian families, I really wanted to help. And I believe one of the best ways to help in this world is to listen. One of my role models is Eleanor Roosevelt, former First Lady in the US, about, like 90 years ago. And she used to go on listening tours around the world. She said the best way to help is to first listen. And as I got to know and interview hundreds of Syrian families, they overwhelmingly told me that they needed better housing. They said they wanted, the British term is caravans. They said they wanted these caravans, and they were living in tents at the time. And so I fundraised money, and with a group of students, we got enough money for 2 caravans to enter the Zaatari camp. And here's a 3-minute video from the former host of The Daily Show, Jon Stewart. He created a documentary, and he actually has our caravan delivery. So this is a clip from his documentary.
يعطيك العافية مروان. الله يسعدك. وين انتو؟ الهلال الأحمر. طيب مروان اسمعني، هم عبارة عن مصابين وصلونا امبارح، فأنا بدي أروح على الاستقبال أشوف شو الآلية اللي ممكن يجوا ياخذوها من عندنا. تمام؟ انتو يعني منين؟
من درعا وحوالي درعا. السوداني كرفان مقدمة الصحية يعني ولا بس المنام؟
لا المنام من هون. خلينا نروح على الشباب اقرب لنا. ايش؟ عني الكرفان تجيك لا بس السكن غرفة. تمام؟ عمر تعال ضغط لي كرة عشان ما تبين. خلينا نروح من هون هسه شباب. انتبهوا بس.
اللي حصلنا عليه امبارح واليوم ولا بالتاريخ واحد مطلوب تلغي.
كيفكم؟ The caravanat from Talib في America, they cared, so they fundraised money. It took them 16 months for these 2 caravans.
هو بحكي لك انه مو طالب امريكي هو اللي تبرع بهذول الكرفانات. فدير بالكم عليهم. ها؟
President Obama, thank you for American people. ايه؟
على حيي.
وعدتيني شان كرفاني ما رحت عليكي.
عمي هذول لانهم مجنون ومصابين وضعهم بالمره سلمناهم هاي وجانا هالكرفانتين. قلنا لهم مصابين. انت
بس ان شاء الله بس اجانا على
بس يجينا كميه يعني كرفانتين شو بدهم يعملوا؟
كرفانتين على كرفانتين شو بدي اسوي لنا؟
يعني ما بيجونا انه والله ما عارفين شو بده يجينا، بس يجينا بنحكي معه. عمي يعطوك المفاتيح هسه بنطلع تسكرهن وبدك ترجع تلم اغراضك من هاي الشباب موجود.
Okay, sorry about that. Sorry, I had to re-share my screen. Okay, perfect. So the boy you saw, I think you guys can see the screen again. That's a picture of Munir. He was in the video at 14 years old. He was shot in the leg as he was walking from his house to a bakery in southern Syria. And so the United Nations prioritized getting him and his family into one of these caravans. Someone who works in the Zaatari camp told me, sorry, let's see if I can get this full screen here. Okay, perfect. Someone who works in the Zaatari camp told me that delivering these caravans is like putting a drop in the ocean. And this is a picture of the Zaatari camp. You know, it took me 5 hours to bike around the whole camp, and it's basically a city. And I can see why he told me it's just a drop in the ocean. But I really believe what we do, and even if we start somewhere small, it can really make a difference. And those students that helped fundraise for these caravans, this is a picture of them. They would stand out in the freezing cold in Buffalo, New York, in order to get enough money for these caravans. And my Jordanian photographer, she showed me this picture of Munir, and she said, you know, yes, it might just be a drop in the ocean, you know, but that one drop really can make a difference. And so I really do believe in ripple effects. I think we all do to some degree. But I didn't understand how much of a ripple effect it could really have, because these students that gave these caravans, these were some of the first caravans that entered the refugee camp. And as I was fundraising for the 5th and the 6th caravan, because I ended up getting 2 more caravans in between that time, I got this email from UNHCR. Kindly note that every family in the Zaatari camp has access to a caravan. And I was so confused, you know, because this camp was at one point 130,000 people. And I said, what do you mean access, you know? And they replied to this email. They said, every single family, you know, now has a caravan. And I couldn't believe it. What had happened was people kind of saw the trend of that caravans were needed. And basically almost overnight, 20,000 caravans were actually given from the UAE and Saudi Arabia. And now to this day, every single family in the Zaatari camp has a caravan. So that's pretty cool to share that with you guys, to the UAE community. Recently, in terms of needs here in Jordan, one of the big needs I'm hearing from Syrian families is just being able to participate in online learning. You know, a lot of Syrian families have shared phones, or their phone doesn't really allow their kids to, you know, participate in online learning. So we got Mohammed a couple of weeks ago. We got him a laptop from the American school in Kuwait, and now he's studying electrical engineering, and now he's able to go to class and participate more than before. And so for me, that's one of my main focuses right now, just figuring out how we can get laptops in order. And actually, there was a shortage even here in Jordan of laptops. And so I knew friends that were going to Dubai and Abu Dhabi and Riyadh, and they were bringing laptops to Jordan. So that is the new focus we're having at Help for Refugees. But for me, the best way in order to make a difference, besides listening to the needs, is following my heart. And I really mean that. You know, I was doing my master's thesis at Cambridge on genocide, looking at past atrocities in Rwanda, Bosnia, Cambodia. And this is a picture of our university library on the right. And the librarian told me, you need to read a book less depressing, because she would always see me with these really, you know, books on crimes. And so I ended up reading The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. And it's now my favorite book. And in this book, it talked about the secret of life being to fall down 7 times and get up 8. And the ironic part is I had actually applied 7 times to intern with President Obama, and I had failed every single time. If you don't believe me, here's a screenshot of all the times I applied and didn't get in. One time I even used a different username, but that didn't work. And so this book actually made me think, okay, I'm going to apply a last 8th time. And on the 8th try, I ended up getting in. And not only interning with Mrs. Obama, which I really loved, but I also got to lead our intern class on foreign policy and international affairs and meet with President Obama's, one of President Obama's advisors on Syria, talking about, options in Syria. It was just fascinating for me. And I share this because I think one of the most important things in following our hearts is, determination and resilience. So those are just a few of the stories I wanted to share before I hear your guys' questions and we can just have a discussion about this. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jordan. Before we do thank you on behalf of the community and bring on Mike Wilson, there were so many key messages that actually link to our ethos in our community. You will find out a bit more about this when you come, obviously even remotely, come to speak to our prep school and senior pupils. But I think what's really important is so many of your values and strengths that you spoke about resonated with our community, and we have the Cranleigh Code. And we also have the image of a gaff tree and the roots. And when I bring our principal on, he will speak about that and link to your story and how that links. And I just sat here and thought, I cannot wait for our pupils to hear your message. And I just want to say also to the community, when I spoke to you and we were planning this Open Minds talk, I really, really wanted to stretch. I mean, I was really excited about what you had done in the White House. And it just shows, Jordan, what an authentic and humble man you are. Because every time I asked you when we chatted in either email or face to face, you kind of bypassed it and you just obviously came back to, help the refugees and, what you really believe in. And I think that really says a lot about you and says about your messages and what's important. And I did have a question, and there's a few more coming through. And actually one of these, I believe, is from a year 7 student, which I think is really powerful. So I'll actually ask his first, if that's okay.
Awesome. Yeah.
How did your policies change the lives of children in the camps?
Oh, that's a great question. For me, it was figuring out what their situation was like at the beginning. And in that Zaatari camp where I showed a lot of the pictures, according to UNICEF, we've got, the last number I saw was just over 60% of children in schools. That was before Corona that I saw that number, so it's tough to know. But you learn the statistics and then you're like, okay, well now I want to, meet the people. And after you meet the people, then you try to share those with the decision makers. And so I met with the Minister of Education here in Jordan, who now he was Prime Minister in Jordan. I think he just left. But just trying to articulate some of what the Syrian families say are their biggest needs, if that makes sense. So I want to have one ear to the ground and one ear on policy. I hope to continue working in U.S. government in the future and not forgetting what the people are saying. But to answer your question in particular, I'm trying to help students. I'm working with this one innovation lab in the refugee camp to help students have more opportunities, more than just their basic subjects. So they can try, the electives that you probably have at your school. Maybe we can have that offered for Syrian students as well.
And there's a question coming through, and this is a big question actually. Sorry to put you on the spot, but one question is coming through is, what is the future for some of the children that you support and see daily on a daily basis?
Yeah. There was this thing called a lost. Hopefully, there's no lost generation in Syria, because so many Syrians have had their education interrupted before COVID, and just because of the conflict. And so, you know, I'm a firm believer in, you know, for me, my own journey, my education has helped me reach my dreams. And so figuring out how we can help these students, these Syrian students, you know, that have these incredible dreams, seeing how we can support them. That's where the laptop idea came. The laptop idea actually started a couple of years ago when the Syrian student asked me to help her to apply for university. And we met at Starbucks, and she was editing her resume and her personal statement on a phone. Can you imagine trying to, you know, submit your whole application through your phone? And that's what a lot of Syrians, so the playing field's not equal. And I just want to try to make the playing field, you know, more equal. That's kind of where I'm at.
And this question is actually personally from me, is what does gratitude mean to you?
For me, it's remembering all the people that helped me, that I didn't get to where I've gotten in life because of just myself, that so many people, you know, have played a role in supporting me, and that we don't get to where we are by ourselves. We're all dependent on others. And then also just remembering that other people have, you know, remembering other people's problems. And you know, when I was in we got a question from a year 7 student. When I was in year 7, the whole idea of the world for me was, what can the world do for Jordan? And I think what some of this work with refugees has helped me learn is, you know, we should flip it. And, you know, at the end of this life, we're not going to be remembered by what we do for ourselves. You know, that we really will be remembered by what we do for others, especially those that don't have, you know, the opportunities, same lifestyle we've had growing up. My grandfather, he's 86 years old. And I asked him, what's the most important thing in life? I loved asking this question. I used to go around asking everyone. And he said to care about people, but not for anything in return. And he said to care about all people. It's easy to care about your friends and your family. I like that answer.
It's really, it just resonates also, not just with our ethos and values at the moment, but also just the situation we're going through. This is another really powerful question, actually, before I bring on our principal, Mr. Michael Wilson, is how can you not get affected or impacted by seeing so many people suffering? And that does come down to, you already mentioned resilience, and sometimes that can be a word that can be overused sometimes and not have meaning. So I don't want to put words in your mouth, but truly, how do you cope on a daily basis?
Well, you know, it's been the most inspiring. Like, if I had to choose any path I've taken, I would choose the same path. You know, I meet some of the most incredible, inspiring, you know, students and teachers and parents around the world. I was at a Anglo-American school in Moscow in Russia, and I was speaking to year 5s, and I'll never forget, after I shared the story of Amina, the 17-year-old girl, but what I didn't share today, and as well as then, was that it was a Russian jet that bombed. You know, we're leaving out the politics. It wasn't important at the time to, you know, tell these year 5 students. And this Russian girl ran downstairs and said, wait 5 minutes. And she brought back this box of money and said, with her friends, and she said, we've been saving up for a year, and this is to rebuild that hospital. And it gives me a lot of hope in the world. But then on top of that, you know, one of the Nuremberg prosecutors, Ben Frenzik, he says, you know, if we're crying on the inside, we better be laughing on the outside, or we'll drown in tears. You know, if we're crying on the inside, we better be laughing on the outside, or we'll drown in tears. And so many of the Syrians I meet, we have such good times. We don't often talk about the refugee crisis. You know, we're just having a good time. And I think it's important to balance some of the intensity of their situation with playing cards or whatever it may be. But I think, And I guess I would just like to add to that and say, in order to be able to stay on this path and not be discouraged by some of the challenges, we have to really believe that we're following our passion. And, you know, for me, when I was in school, I felt like the whole world was telling me what I should care about. And I think it's really up to us to, you know, find and follow our passion, you know, and it doesn't have to be the Syrian refugee crisis, but whatever you care most about, just to fearlessly follow it, you know, and to not let anyone tell you that what you care about doesn't matter, because I think it really does.
Thank you so much. As I said, I'm so excited for you to speak to our pupils over the next 2 weeks. Just for the community to know, we will put in the newsletter if you do want to find out more about Jordan and help for refugees. And without further ado, I will bring up our principal, Mr. Mike Wilson, for the final words.
Jordan, thank you for that. It was very, very powerful. And I just want to reflect on a couple of things you say. One of them I think really is very important to repeat, which is that statement, we must learn to love beauty more than we hate evil. I think that's a very, very powerful statement, because we're talking to youngsters who are being brought up into a world where they haven't got, as President Obama so rightly said, they haven't got prejudice. They haven't got, you know, they look at each other as friends and people that they get on with. They don't look at people in terms of their color, their creed. And it's really, really important that that statement is something that's reinforced. The other thing I want to say is something you also reflected on, because we are sitting in the middle of a COVID crisis. We're sitting in a lovely city with people looking after us. And it's very easy to think, crumbs, we're being held from school because of COVID, and it's all relative. And that statement you said about what can the world do for Jordan, classic sort of teenager approach to life. My father used to, when I was in that sort of teenage moment, he used to call me aside, and I always knew I was in trouble because he'd look me very deeply in the eye and go very quiet. And he'd say, now let's just change that M in the word me and turn it over and make a W for we. And I think that's really important. So thank you for your words today, and thank you in anticipation for what you're going to say to the pupils. What I would say to the Cranleigh community, particularly the pupil community, is this really is your world to change. And I think what's happened over the last year has really focused on the idea that we do need to change it. You know, we have an awful lot to sort out, and there's no time like the present to do it. So thank you for your inspiration. Thank you for what you do. And I look forward to hearing the sort of commentary and the discussion that we stimulate over the next couple of weeks. And as I say, let's see what we can do to produce the next generation of you who can go out and help people who are in need. So thank you very much, and thank you for your time tonight.
I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Brilliant.